Helen's earliest memories were not of laughter or lullabies, but of raised voices and quiet sobs muffled behind thin walls. Her childhood home was not just a house of mud bricks and corrugated iron. It was a house heavy with fear, judgment, and silence. Every corner seemed to echo with the sharp voice of her grandmother, every night haunted by her mother's stifled cries. At 6 years old, Helen already knew the language of pain. She remembered one afternoon when her mother served dinner. The beans had cooked too long, soft enough to melt in the mouth. Her grandmother exploded. "Foolish woman," she hissed, slamming her spoon against the clay plate. "You cannot even cook beans properly? My son works hard every day, and this is how you feed him? You're useless." Helen, clutching her rag doll in the corner, froze. Her little heart pounded. Her mother fell to her knees, tears brimming. "Mama, forgive me," her mother pleaded. "It will not happen again. The words ended in a stinging slap. Helen's eyes darted to her father. He sat on a low stool, newspaper in hand, expression calm as though he heard nothing. His silence was like a second blow, heavier than the first. It was always like that. Her grandmother's voice ruled the household. Her mother bore the brunt of every storm. And her father never defended her. Another memory carved itself into Helen's heart one stormy evening. Lightning lit up the compound as her mother rushed outside to bring in clothes from the line. A gust of wind tore her grandmother's wrapper into the mud. The old woman's wail rose above the thunder. "Do you know how much that cloth cost me? Useless woman. You can't do anything right." Before her mother could explain, another slap fell. Helen sat huddled in the corner, arms around her knees, trembling. She wanted to scream, to say something, anything. But fear glued her lips. Instead, her eyes drifted to her father, who was cracking roasted groundnuts, chewing slowly, as if nothing was happening. It was then that Helen made her vow. "I will never live under another woman's cruelty. Never." School became her escape. In books, she found worlds far from her own. She read of families who laughed together, fathers who defended their wives, and grandmothers who told stories instead of curses. She wanted that world desperately. Sometimes teachers noticed her withdrawn silence. "Helen," one teacher asked softly, "is everything all right at home?" She smiled tightly. "Yes, Ma." But inside, she was screaming. How could she tell them that her grandmother ruled her house like a tyrant and her father let it happen? How could she put into words the helplessness of being a child in a battlefield she never chose? By 16, Helen was tall, graceful, and outwardly strong. But her eyes carried storms that never cleared. She had learned to mask fear with defiance. Her mother, sensing her daughter's hardness, often tried to soothe her. "Helen," she would say, voice weary yet gentle, "don't let anger destroy you. Not every woman is like your grandmother." But Helen shook her head. "Mama, I don't care. I will never marry into a family where there is a mother-in-law. I won't let what happened to you happen to me." Her mother would sigh deeply. She wanted to argue but lacked the strength. Too many years of being silenced had stolen her fire. One evening, a quarrel shook the house again. Her grandmother accused her mother of disrespect for speaking too loudly when a visitor was around. "You think you have a voice in this house?" her grandmother sneered. "You are nothing here." Her father sipped palm wine silently. Her mother retreated, weeping. Helen, burning with fury, turned to her father. "Why don't you ever say anything? Why do you let her do this to Mama?" Her father looked at her, startled. For a moment, his lips parted as if he might answer, but then he said in a low voice, "It is better to keep peace in a home than to fight every battle." Helen's fists clenched. "Peace? What peace? Mama is dying inside, and you sit here pretending everything is fine. That is not peace, it is cowardice." He lowered his gaze. That was all. Helen's hatred shifted that night. No longer was it only her grandmother she despised. It was also her father, whose silence was as cruel as her grandmother's words. As the years passed, the abuse left scars deeper than anyone could see. Her mother grew thin, her eyes dull from constant tears. Helen grew strong-willed, but her strength was a shield, not healing. At night, she lay awake replaying scenes in her mind. Her mother's swollen cheeks, her father's silence, her grandmother's scorn. Each memory was a stone on her heart, building a wall of fear. She told herself over and over, "I will never marry into a family where a mother-in-law exists." Never. But vows are tested by life. One day, while walking home from the market, Helen overheard two women talking. "They say Mama Igioma has found a good man for her daughter," one woman said. "A man whose mother passed away years ago. No mother-in-law trouble." Helen's heart skipped. A man without a mother? She thought. That is the only kind of man I will ever marry. At that moment, she didn't know destiny was listening, waiting patiently to test her vow. For now, she carried her scars, her anger, and her fear. But the time would come when she would have to choose. Remain chained by her childhood shadows, or step into a future she never thought possible. Helen blossomed into a beautiful young woman. By the time she was in her early 20s, her tall frame and striking features turned heads wherever she went. Her skin, the color of polished bronze, glowed under the sun, and her eyes carried a quiet intensity that both intrigued and intimidated. Suitors came often farmers, traders, civil servants, even a schoolteacher, but Helen carried with her a vow carved into her heart since childhood. Never marry into a family where there is a mother-in-law. The first man to come knocking was Peter, a wealthy cocoa trader. He arrived at her father's compound with his relatives, bringing palm wine, yams, and gifts. Helen's mother, timid but hopeful, whispered to her daughter, "My child, he is a good man. You will be comfortable with him." But Helen asked one question that silenced the excitement in the room. "Does he have a mother?" Peter, smiling proudly, answered, "Yes, of course. My mother is alive and strong." Helen's face hardened. She shook her head and walked away without explanation. Her father scolded her for disrespect, but Helen stood firm. She would not subject herself to another woman's authority. The second suitor was Michael, a young teacher with gentle eyes. He came one evening with only his uncle, speaking eloquently about his plans for the future. He said he wanted a wife who would be his partner, not just a homemaker. Helen almost softened until she asked the same question. "My mother is alive," Michael said, confused by the intensity of her stare. That was enough. Helen turned him down without hesitation. By the time the third and fourth men came, word had spread in the village. People whispered, "Helen is too proud. She insults men by rejecting them. She will die unmarried." But Helen didn't care. Each time she heard a man had a living mother, fear gripped her chest, stronger than the sting of gossip. She remembered the nights her mother cried herself to sleep, the slaps, the insults, the silence of her father. She could not walk willingly into the same prison. Then came John. They met not through family introductions, but by chance at the market. Helen had gone to buy cassava flour when she saw a young man struggling with a sack of rice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a calm smile. His laugh came easily, and he greeted everyone warmly. "Let me help you with that," Helen said impulsively. John looked at her in surprise. "You? A fine young woman like you should not be lifting rice sacks." Helen smiled faintly. Strength is not only for men. She grabbed one end of the sack, and together they carried it to his stall. From that moment, their paths began to cross more often. At first, it was small greetings at the market, then longer conversations by the roadside. John spoke about his childhood, his siblings, and his dreams of starting a proper business. Helen listened, guarded but curious. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange, John confessed, "I like you, Helen. I want us to be more than friends." Helen's heart thudded. The walls she had built rose quickly in her mind. She asked the question she always asked, her voice trembling. "Do you have a mother?" John's expression changed. His smile faded into something softer, almost sorrowful. "No," he said after a pause. "She left us when I was a child. I haven't seen her for 15 years. For the first time in her life, Helen's chest loosened. Relief washed over her like cool water. A man without a mother. A safe man. Their relationship blossomed quickly. John was kind, attentive, and respectful. Unlike many men in the village, he listened when she spoke. He encouraged her ideas and laughed at her sharp humor. With him, Helen felt free in ways she had never known. Her mother noticed the change. "You smile more these days," she said one evening as they prepared dinner. "Is it because of John?" Helen blushed but nodded. "Mama, he is different. And best of all, he has no mother to trouble me." Her mother's knife paused mid-slice. She sighed. "My daughter, do not marry only because of fear. Life has a way of surprising us." But Helen waved her off. "Mama, you don't understand. I know what I am doing." Their marriage preparations began, and for once, Helen felt she had outsmarted fate. The community still gossiped. Some said she was too picky, others that John was unlucky for being motherless, but Helen paid no mind. She finally felt secure. The wedding was simple but joyful. Friends and family danced under the sun, drums echoing across the compound. Helen wore white lace, her smile radiant. John held her hand firmly, as though promising the world. For a while, everything was bliss. They built their home with laughter, planning children and dreaming of the future. Helen believed she had escaped the curse of her childhood. But life, as her mother had warned, has a way of surprising us. It began on a humid afternoon 2 years into their marriage. John returned home, his face pale, his eyes distant. "What is it?" Helen asked, her hands still dusty from pounding yam. He sat down heavily. "My mother, she has returned. After 15 years. Helen froze. Her pestle slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her chest tightened, breath catching in her throat. "What did you say?" she whispered. "She came to see me," John said quietly. "She wants to beg for forgiveness. She said she was foolish, that she made mistakes. She wants to be part of our lives again." Helen's stomach twisted. Her vision blurred with fear. The memories of her childhood flooded back, the insults, the slaps, her father's silence. Her voice rose, trembling. "No, John. No. Don't let her in. Don't forgive her. She will destroy us." John reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Helen, she is my mother. She abandoned you." Helen snapped. "And now she wants to return and make my life miserable? I will not let it happen." Her fear was not only about John's mother, it was about her grandmother, her father, her mother's suffering. To Helen, all mothers-in-law were the same. Wicked. Dangerous. A threat to her happiness. That night, she lay awake beside John, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in her marriage, she felt the walls closing in. She had chosen John because he was safe. And now, safety had been snatched from her. As the days passed, John tried to reason with her. "Helen, she is not my grandmother. She is my mother. People make mistakes. Should we not give her a chance?" Helen shook her head fiercely. "You don't know what it means to live with a wicked mother-in-law." "I know. I saw it every day. I will never allow it." Her voice cracked with desperation, but John remained calm. He believed in forgiveness. She believed in fear. The war lines had been drawn in their marriage. Hello guys, thank you for your time. I hope you are enjoying our story about Helen's decision never to get married to a man whose mother is alive. Please take a moment to follow and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on our upcoming stories. Thank you. The first time Helen saw her mother-in-law, it was like watching a ghost walk into her life. It was a Sunday afternoon. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the air smelled of rain. John had gone to the front of the house to meet a visitor, and Helen, curious, peered through the curtain. Her breath caught in her throat. There she was, a woman with tired eyes, her wrapper faded, her hair streaked with gray. She stood with both hands clasped together, trembling as though the earth itself rejected her presence. John turned back into the house, his voice low. "Helen, this is my mother." Helen staggered back. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. A wave of panic swept through her body. She wanted to run, to lock the door, to scream. Instead, she whispered, "Send her away." "Helen, send her away," she snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. John's face fell, but before he could respond, his mother spoke. Her voice was weak, but each word carried the weight of 15 years. "John, my son, I came to beg. Forgive me. I was foolish. I made mistakes. I want to be your mother again, if you will let me." Helen could no longer breathe. Her hands shook violently. Every memory of her childhood returned, the raised voice of her grandmother, her mother's tears, her father's silence. She felt the walls closing in, and in that moment, she wasn't seeing John's mother. She was seeing her grandmother. "No," Helen whispered fiercely. "She will not stay here. Not in this house." John's mother lingered for a while, pleading softly, but Helen's eyes were like fire. Finally, John walked her outside, promising to speak later. When he returned, Helen stood rigid, her arms crossed. "She is not staying here," Helen said. John sighed heavily. "She is my mother, Helen. What do you want me to do? Pretend she doesn't exist?" "Yes," Helen shot back. "That's exactly what I want. She left you. She doesn't deserve you. And she will never have a chance to hurt me." Her voice shook, not from anger alone but from raw, unspoken fear. Over the following weeks, John's mother kept returning. Sometimes she stood at the gate for hours, waiting for John to come out. Other times she sent messages through relatives. "Tell my son I am sorry. Tell him I only want forgiveness." The community began to whisper. Some said she was a wicked woman who had abandoned her children for another man. Others said she had suffered and was truly repentant. The voices grew louder each day, and Helen hated it. Wherever she went, she felt eyes on her, judging, waiting to see whether she would allow the woman back into their lives. At home, tension thickened like smoke. John pleaded with her gently, trying to reassure her. "Helen, you are my wife. You come first. I will never allow anyone to harm you. But can't you at least meet her? See her for yourself?" Helen shook her head violently. "No. Don't you understand? I know how this ends. I saw it with my mother. She will smile at you. She will pretend to be kind. But behind closed doors she will destroy me. And you will keep quiet like my father did." John recoiled as though struck. "Helen, I am not your father. I will not abandon you. Don't compare me to him." But Helen's fear was stronger than his words. One evening, the argument boiled over. John had returned late, his shirt damp from the rain. Helen stood waiting, her eyes blazing. "You went to see her again, didn't you?" she demanded. John exhaled slowly. "Yes. She asked me to meet her at the church. She only wanted to talk." Helen's chest tightened. "You lied to me. You promised." "I promised you safety," John interrupted, his voice rising for the first time. "And I have kept that promise. She has not stepped into this house again. But I will not deny my own mother when she begs me on her knees for forgiveness. What kind of son would that make me? What kind of husband does that make you?" Helen shot back, tears streaming down her face. "Do you care more about her than about me? About us?" John's jaw clenched. "Don't do this, Helen. Don't make me choose between you and her." But in Helen's mind, the choice had already been made. If John allowed his mother back, everything she feared would come true. That night, she packed a small bag and placed it by the door. "If she comes into this house, John," she said coldly, "I will leave. I will not live under the shadow of a mother-in-law. I would rather end this marriage than suffer like my mother did." John sat in silence, staring at the bag. His heart ached. He loved Helen deeply, but he also loved his mother despite her failings. He believed people could change. He believed in second chances. But Helen's fear was a wall he could not climb. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken words. They moved around each other like strangers, the warmth of their early marriage fading into icy tension. Helen's smile disappeared. John's laughter grew rare. Even their neighbors noticed. One woman whispered to another, "That marriage is shaking. They say it is because of the mother-in-law." Helen heard the whispers and burned with anger. She hated being pitted. She hated being judged. But most of all, she hated the idea that history was repeating itself, and she was powerless to stop it. One evening, after yet another argument, Helen stormed out of the house and went to her mother's compound. She sat on the wooden bench outside, her face buried in her hands. Her mother came out slowly, her body frail but her eyes still kind. She sat beside Helen, placing a gentle hand on her back. "My daughter, what troubles you?" Helen looked up, her face streaked with tears. "Mama, John's mother is back. She wants to be part of our lives. I told him no, but he won't listen. He says she has changed. Mama, I can't do it. I can't live with a mother-in-law. I'd rather leave my marriage." Her mother listened quietly, nodding. Then she said softly, "Helen, not every woman is like my mother-in-law. Not every story will end like mine." Helen's voice broke. "But Mama, you suffered. I watched you suffer. And Papa did nothing. I can't go through that. I can't." Her mother's eyes glistened. "Yes, I suffered. And your father failed me. But you are not me, and John is not your father. Don't let my pain blind you to what could be your blessing. Give the woman a chance. If she hurts you, then fight. But don't let fear rule your marriage." Helen shook her head stubbornly. But her mother's words lingered, like seeds planted in soil. For the first time, Helen wondered, what if I am wrong? Still, the battle inside her raged. At night, she lay beside John, unable to sleep. She stared at him, at the man who had promised to love her, the man she once trusted without fear. Could she trust him still? Could she trust his mother? The thought alone sent shivers down her spine. But destiny was moving, whether Helen liked it or not. The return of John's mother was no longer a shadow, it was a storm. And sooner or later, Helen would have to face it. The silence between Helen and John was growing heavier with each passing day. Their once lively home, filled with laughter and warm conversations, now echoed with unspoken words. Helen's heart was like a fortress under siege, walls of fear rising higher every time John mentioned his mother. And John, weary but unrelenting, stood outside those walls, knocking, pleading, hoping she would open up. Helen could not shake the shadows of her childhood. The more John tried to reason with her, the more she felt trapped in an old nightmare. She saw her mother, bent under the weight of her grandmother's cruelty, enduring insults and humiliation, with no one least of all her father to defend her. That memory hardened into iron in her chest whenever John spoke of forgiveness. One evening, after supper, John sat across from her, his eyes tired but determined. "Helen," he began softly, "we cannot continue like this. My mother has been waiting for months, begging just to see me to explain. I feel like a prisoner in my own home because I cannot even talk about her without you shutting down. Why can't you at least try to understand?" Helen's spoon clattered against her bowl, her patience worn thin. "Understand? John, you expect me to welcome a woman who abandoned you for 15 years? Who left you and your sister to fend for yourselves while she ran off with another man? Do you know what that means? Do you know the kind of heart a woman must have to do such a thing?" John exhaled, frustrated but trying to keep calm. "Yes, I know what it means. I lived it, Helen. I was there. But what I also know is that carrying bitterness will not change the past. I have carried this weight long enough. She is my mother, and whether you like it or not, that bond cannot be erased." Helen's voice rose, trembling with fear and anger. "You don't understand me, John. You don't understand what I saw growing up. My mother was destroyed by her mother-in-law. My father watched and did nothing. Do you know what that does to a child? Do you know what it feels like to see the woman who gave you life treated like a slave in her own home?" John leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "But I am not your father, Helen, and my mother is not your grandmother. You are punishing me and her for sins we did not commit." Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to run, to lock herself away from this looming storm. Her fears were not rational, she knew that somewhere deep inside. But fear was rarely rational, it was raw, alive, and merciless. The days that followed were a battleground. Helen avoided conversations, burying herself in chores and silence. John, though patient, grew weary of tiptoeing around her. Sometimes he would sit alone in the yard, staring into the night, wondering how love so strong could be strangled by fear. One morning, as Helen swept the veranda, a neighbor, Mama Chinyere, approached her. She was a stout woman with a voice that carried wisdom born of hardship. "Helen, my daughter," she said gently, "I hear things. The village talks. They say you will not allow John to see his mother. Is it true?" Helen stiffened, embarrassed. "Mama, people talk too much. They don't understand." Mama Chinyere sighed. "Maybe they don't, but I do. I also feared my husband's mother once. I thought she would destroy me. But sometimes, fear is only the ghost of another person's story, not our own. You must ask yourself, Helen, are you living your life, or are you still living in your mother's pain?" Helen's chest tightened. She wanted to dismiss the old woman's words, but they struck deep. Still, her pride held her back. "It is easy for you to say, Mama. You did not see what I saw." The woman placed a hand on her shoulder. "True, but do not let what you saw blind you from what could be different." That night, Helen confronted John again, this time with fire. "If you bring that woman into this house, John, I will leave. I swear it. I cannot live under the same roof with her. I will not be destroyed like my mother was." John's face darkened. His patience cracked. "And if you leave, Helen, what will that make us? Are you willing to throw away our marriage because of a ghost from the past? Because of something that hasn't even happened yet?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I am protecting myself. I am protecting us." John shook his head. "No, Helen. You are destroying us. This marriage cannot stand on fear alone. I have tried to understand you. I have listened to you. But what about me? Do my feelings not matter? Does my longing for peace with my mother mean nothing?" Silence swallowed the room, broken only by the sound of her sobbing. Helen turned away, trembling, her heart torn between the man she loved and the fears she could not let go of. As weeks dragged on, the whispers in the community grew louder. People called John's mother a wicked woman, cursed for abandoning her children. They warned John not to trust her, saying a mother who could leave once could always leave again. These voices fed Helen's resistance, giving her the illusion of support. But deep down, even she began to wonder if her fear was too strong, too consuming. One afternoon, after another heated argument, John left the house without a word. He walked aimlessly through the village, past the market, past the farmlands, until he reached the riverbank. Sitting on a rock, he buried his face in his hands. He loved Helen, but he was suffocating. He wanted to heal the brokenness of his past, yet his wife was dragging him deeper into it. When he returned home late that night, Helen was waiting, her eyes swollen from crying. John, she whispered, I don't want to lose you. But I am so afraid. John sat beside her, exhausted. Then let me in, Helen. Let me show you that fear does not have to rule us. I cannot fight this battle alone. You are my wife, my partner. Stand with me, not against me. She nodded weakly, but inside, her heart was still a battlefield. The struggle between love and fear raged on, with no clear victor. And so the house remained divided, their love stretched thin by an unseen enemy, one that came not from John's mother, but from the shadows of Helen's past. The true question was no longer about forgiveness, but whether Helen could ever believe that her story could be different. The tension in John and Helen's home had become unbearable. Days bled into nights in silence, and the love that once flowed so freely between them now moved like water through a clogged pipe, struggling, stuck, suffocating. John had tried patience, he had tried persuasion, and even anger, but nothing worked. Helen's fear remained an iron chain around her heart. One evening, after yet another argument that ended with Helen threatening to pack her things, John sat alone in the courtyard, his face buried in his hands. The moon hung high, indifferent to his pain. He thought of his mother, waiting patiently, humbling herself before people who mocked her, begging for forgiveness from children she had abandoned. He thought of Helen, trembling before shadows that did not belong to her. At last, John rose with a heavy heart. There was one person left who might reach her, the very woman who had lived through the pain Helen feared. The next morning, John traveled to the nearby town where Helen's mother, Mama Grace, lived. He found her in her small compound, bent over a basin of laundry. Time had curved her back and drawn lines across her face, but her eyes still carried the fire of a woman who had endured storms and survived them. "Mama," John greeted, kneeling respectfully. "Ah, John, my son," she replied, wiping her hands on her wrapper. "What brings you here so suddenly? Is Helen well?" John hesitated, his voice low. "Mama, that is why I am here. Helen is not well in her spirit. She is trapped in fear of my mother. She believes that welcoming her back into our lives will destroy us. I have tried everything, but she will not listen. I need your help." Mama Grace's face darkened. She sat down on a wooden stool, sighing deeply. So it has come to this." "Yes, Mama," John said earnestly. "You are the only one she might hear. You know what she carries inside her. Please, talk to her before this marriage breaks apart." Mama Grace nodded slowly, her mind drifting to memories she had buried long ago. She too had once been Helen, young, afraid, and voiceless in a marriage where her husband's silence was her torment. She had endured the cruelty of her mother-in-law until her heart became a graveyard of dreams. Perhaps, without meaning to, she had passed that fear into her daughter. "I will come," she said at last, her voice firm. The visit. 2 days later, Mama Grace arrived at Helen's home unannounced. Helen was startled to see her mother standing at the doorway, holding a small bag and wearing a look of quiet determination. "Mama," Helen exclaimed, "you didn't tell me you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," Mama Grace said, stepping inside. "Besides, some matters cannot wait." John, who had been sitting quietly in the living room, rose and greeted her with relief in his eyes. He knew she had come for more than a visit. Helen fussed over her mother, offering water and food, but Mama Grace waved it away. "Sit down, Helen," she said sternly. "We need to talk." The weight in her voice silenced the room. Helen sat, fidgeting with her hands, while John excused himself to give them space. Mama Grace studied her daughter for a long moment. "Helen, my child, John tells me you are ready to end your marriage because of his mother. Is it true?" Tears welled in Helen's eyes. "Mama, you don't understand. I cannot live under the shadow of a mother-in-law. I saw what your mother did to you. I watched you suffer, and I swore never to walk that path." Mama Grace's face softened with pain. "Yes, you saw me suffer, but you also saw me survive. Do you think I do not know the scars my silence left on you and your siblings? I failed you in many ways, Helen. I endured quietly, believing endurance was strength. But endurance without defense is bondage. And your father, God rest his soul, he failed us all by choosing silence when he should have stood." Helen's tears spilled down her cheeks. "So you admit it? That's exactly what I fear. That John will stand aside, and his mother will destroy me." Mama Grace leaned forward, taking her daughter's trembling hands. "No, Helen. You are fighting the wrong battle. You are not me, and John is not your father. You are living my past as if it is your future. But every woman must write her own story. Do not let my pain become your prophecy." Helen blinked, stunned. "But Mama, what if she is like Grandma? What if she makes me suffer? Then you will not suffer in silence as I did, Mama Grace said firmly. You have a voice, Helen. You have a husband who listens. And you have learned from my mistakes. Do not chain yourself with my shadows. Break the chain. Forgive, even if it feels impossible. Forgiveness is not weakness, it is freedom. The turning point. Helen wept into her mother's lap, her heart torn open by truths she had never heard spoken aloud. For the first time, she realized she was carrying not only her own fears, but also her mother's silence. Mama, she whispered, I don't know if I can. You can, Mama Grace replied gently. Do it for yourself, not just for John. And remember, forgiveness does not mean forgetting what was done. It means refusing to let it rule your future. Later that evening, John returned, unsure of what to expect. He found Helen and her mother sitting together, their hands clasped, their faces damp with tears but calmer than he had seen in weeks. Mama Grace stood and placed Helen's hand in John's. My children, marriage is not built on fear. It is built on trust and courage. Helen, listen to your husband. And John, protect your wife. Do not repeat the sins of silence that destroyed my home. John's throat tightened as he nodded. I promise, Mama. I will always stand by Helen. Helen looked at her husband, her eyes red but softer than before. For the first time, she saw not the ghost of her father in him, but the man he truly was. That night, as they lay in bed, Helen whispered, John, maybe I can meet her. Just once. But promise me you will be by my side. John held her close, his heart flooding with relief. Always, Helen. Always. Community whispers. Word spread quickly that Helen's mother had visited, and tongues wagged. Some mocked John for needing an outsider to settle his home. Others said Mama Grace had bewitched her daughter into submission. But none of that mattered. For the first time in months, John and Helen felt a glimmer of peace. The struggle was not over. Fear does not vanish overnight. But a door had been cracked open. The first step toward healing had been taken, and it was because one woman chose to speak the truth she had buried for too long. Helen's reflection. As Helen lay awake that night, she thought of her childhood, her mother weeping silently in the kitchen, her grandmother's sharp tongue slicing through the air, her father's eyes turned away. And then she thought of Mama Grace sitting in her living room, telling her not to inherit her pain. Perhaps it was time to believe that not all mothers-in-law were monsters. Perhaps it was time to let love, not fear, guide her steps. The journey ahead frightened her, but for the first time, she felt hope flicker in the darkness. The morning of the meeting dawned heavy with expectation. Helen sat at the edge of the bed, her palms damp with sweat, her heart a wild drum in her chest. It felt as though she were preparing for battle, though the enemy was not a stranger with weapons, but a woman she had never met, her husband's mother. John moved quietly around the room, careful not to pressure her. He had waited months for this day, yet he knew one wrong word could undo all the fragile progress they had made. Are you ready? He asked gently, adjusting his shirt. Helen swallowed hard. No, but I'll come. Those words, though trembling, filled John with hope. He reached for her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. That's enough, Helen. We'll take it step by step. And remember, I'll be right beside you. They traveled to the small compound where John's mother, Mama Esther, was staying with her younger sister. The path wound through the village, past children chasing goats, past old women gossiping under mango trees, past the stares of neighbors who whispered about the wicked woman who had returned. Helen kept her head down, clutching John's hand like a lifeline. Every step closer made her chest tighten. Memories of her grandmother's sharp voice, her mother's tears, and her father's indifference flooded her mind. She almost turned back twice, but John's steady presence anchored her. Finally, they reached the compound. Mama Esther sat on a wooden bench outside, her frame thinner than Helen expected, her wrapper faded, her face marked with the deep lines of time and regret. At the sight of her son, her eyes lit up with tears, but when she saw Helen, she froze, her hands trembling as if afraid to reach out. John, Mama Esther whispered, rising slowly. Her voice cracked, thick with emotion. My son. John went to her, embracing her tightly. The years of separation dissolved in that single moment, tears streaming freely down both their faces. Helen stood awkwardly, watching, her heart torn between pity and suspicion. When they pulled apart, Mama Esther turned to Helen, her knees buckling slightly. To Helen's shock, she fell to the ground, bowing her head. Daughter, she said, her voice breaking, forgive me. I am not worthy to stand before you. I left my children. I left my son. I left the home that should have been my pride. If not for my shame, I would never dare to call myself your mother-in-law. But today, I beg for a chance not to erase the past, but to show you that I am not the monster you fear." Helen gasped, stunned by the humility before her. She had braced herself for arrogance, for entitlement, for the commanding presence of a woman who would rule her household. Instead, she saw a broken mother, bent by guilt, trembling with sincerity. Her lips parted, but no words came. John stepped forward, gently lifting his mother from the ground. "Mama, you don't need to kneel. Please. We have all suffered enough. Just speak your truth." They sat under the mango tree in the compound, the breeze carrying the faint scent of ripening fruit. For a long while, silence hung between them. Then Mama Esther began to speak. "I was young when I married your father," she said softly. "Too young, perhaps, and foolish. Life was hard. I felt trapped, unloved. When another man offered me comfort, I was weak. I chose wrongly. I left, thinking I would find happiness. But happiness built on abandonment never lasts. That man left me too, and I was left with nothing but regret. For 15 years, regret has been my companion." Her eyes brimmed with tears as she turned to Helen. "I know what people say of me, that I am wicked, cursed, unworthy. Perhaps they are right, but wickedness is not what I wanted for my children. I thought leaving would bring me peace, but instead, it brought pain to everyone. If you cannot forgive me, I understand. But please, do not keep my son from knowing his mother. Let me at least beg for his forgiveness, if not yours." Helen listened, her chest tight. Every word pulled at the knots of her fear. This was not the domineering figure she had imagined. This was a woman broken by her own mistakes, carrying her shame like a cross. Still, the echoes of her past screamed inside her, "Be careful. Don't be fooled. Mothers-in-law are dangerous." At last she spoke, her voice shaky. "You say you are not wicked, but how do I know? My mother suffered at the hands of her mother-in-law until she had no strength left. I grew up watching her die a little every day, while my father stood aside. I cannot go through the same." Mama Esther reached out slowly, her hands trembling, but she did not touch Helen. "My daughter, your fear is real. I cannot erase it with words. All I can do is show you, day by day, that I am not here to destroy, but to love. Give me a chance. Judge me by my actions, not by your past." Helen looked at John. His eyes pleaded silently, "See her. See me. See us." Her defenses began to crack. She had expected to meet her grandmother's shadow, but instead she found a mirror of her own mother, flawed, wounded, yet yearning for love. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted. "But maybe I can try." Mama Esther's face crumpled with relief. She bowed her head, whispering prayers of gratitude. "Thank you, my daughter. That is all I ask, a chance." John took Helen's hand, squeezing it firmly. He whispered, "You've done more today than I ever dreamed. Thank you." Later, Mama Esther's sister prepared a simple meal of yam and vegetable stew. They ate together, and though the silence was heavy at first, it gradually gave way to small exchanges. Mama Esther asked Helen about her work, about her home, about her dreams. She listened more than she spoke, careful not to intrude. Helen watched her closely, still wary, but also curious. Each smile, each gentle word, chipped away at the monstrous image she had built in her mind. By the time they left that evening, Helen's steps felt lighter, though her heart still carried uncertainty. She knew forgiveness was not a switch to be flipped, but a journey to be walked. Still, for the first time, she believed the journey might not end in destruction. That night, lying in bed beside John, Helen replayed the day in her mind. The sight of Mama Esther kneeling, the tremble in her voice, the weight of her regret. She remembered her mother's words, "Do not let my pain become your prophecy." Perhaps her story could be different. Perhaps she could be the woman who broke the chain. She turned to John, whispering, "Your mother, she is not what I expected." John smiled softly in the dark. "No, she is not." For the first time, Helen allowed herself to hope not just for her marriage, but for a new kind of family, one not built on fear, but on the courage to forgive. The days following Helen's first meeting with Mama Esther passed like cautious steps on unfamiliar ground. Helen felt as though she were walking a rope bridge, suspended between two cliffs, the past she had inherited and the future she hoped to create. Every smile from Mama Esther loosened one knot of fear, but every silence from her own memories tied another. Helen was not naive. She knew one meeting could not erase years of dread. Yet, as she lay awake at night, she found herself returning not to her grandmother's cruelty, but to Mama Esther's trembling knees, her bowed head, her broken words. It unsettled her in a strange way. If Mama Esther was not a monster, then who was Helen fighting all these years? One morning, while sweeping the compound, Helen paused to watch the children playing in the yard. Their laughter rang clear, untainted by shadows of fear. For the first time, she wondered, what am I passing down to them? She saw herself in her mother's kitchen long ago, small and helpless, listening to her grandmother's insults. She remembered her father's silence, his way of pretending not to hear. It was not only her grandmother's cruelty that hurt, but her father's refusal to shield them. His silence had been a knife sharpened daily by neglect. And now here she was, almost repeating the same mistake, allowing fear to speak louder than love, allowing silence to poison her marriage. That thought struck her like thunder. If she didn't change, her children would inherit her fears just as she had inherited her mother's. That evening, Helen sat with her mother under the mango tree outside their old home. Mama Grace listened quietly as Helen poured out her thoughts. "Mama," Helen said, her voice thick, "why did Father never defend you? Why did he let Grandma destroy your peace while we all watched?" Mama Grace sighed, her eyes heavy with memory. "Your father was a good man in many ways, but he was weak in the one place that mattered most. He thought keeping peace with his mother was more important than protecting me. He never understood that his silence was betrayal." Tears slid down Helen's cheeks. "And because of that, I grew up believing every mother-in-law is an enemy. I carried that fear into my marriage. I almost destroyed John and me because of what I saw." Her mother touched her hand gently. "Then break the cycle, Helen. Do not repeat our mistakes. Do not let fear or silence rule your home. John is not your father, and you are not me. You have the chance to live differently. Take it." The words sank deep into Helen's heart. For years, she had blamed her grandmother, but now she saw her father's failure more clearly. He had chosen silence when his voice was needed most. She vowed that she would never make the same choice. When John returned from the farm the next day, tired and sweaty, Helen met him at the doorway with an unusual calm. "John," she said softly, "I've been thinking." He raised an eyebrow, wary but hopeful. "About what?" "About us. About your mother. About everything." She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I don't want to be like my father. I don't want to stand by and let silence destroy what we have. I want to really try with your mother. But I need you to promise me something." John set down his tools, his eyes intent. "Anything. Promise me you will never be silent. If there is ever a day when your mother or anyone tries to make me feel small, promise you will stand by me." John stepped closer, taking her hands. His voice was firm, unwavering. "Helen, I swear it. You are my wife, my partner. I will never let you walk this road alone. I am not my father, and you are not doomed to your mother's story. We will write our own." For the first time, Helen believed him not just with her ears, but with her heart. The following week, Helen invited Mama Esther to visit their home. It was not easy. Her stomach churned as she prepared the meal, her mind racing with what-ifs. But when Mama Esther arrived, humble and soft-spoken, Helen surprised herself by offering her a seat with a genuine, if cautious, smile. As they ate, Helen asked her questions, not accusatory ones, but gentle, curious ones. Mama Esther answered with honesty, admitting her failures, but also sharing her dreams for reconciliation. At one point, Helen caught herself laughing softly at one of Mama Esther's stories about John as a child, how he once tried to trap a goat with a basket and ended up trapped inside it himself. The sound startled her, but it felt good, like a weight lifting from her chest. John watched them quietly, his heart swelling. He saw two women who had once been enemies in fear slowly reaching toward each other with fragile threads of trust. Later that evening, after Mama Esther had left, Helen and John sat under the moonlight. Helen leaned against him, her voice soft but clear. "John, I've realized something. My real enemy was never your mother. It was silence. Silence destroyed my parents' marriage. Silence poisoned my childhood. And I almost let it destroy us too." John kissed her forehead gently. "But you didn't. You found your voice, Helen. And I will always listen." She smiled faintly, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Then maybe, just maybe, our children will never know the fear I carried. They will know love and protection and courage. That is how we will break the cycle." Word spread quickly that Helen had welcomed her mother-in-law into her home. Some villagers scoffed, saying she was foolish to trust a woman with such a past. Others whispered that perhaps Helen had finally come to her senses. But Helen no longer cared about the gossip. For the first time, she felt free not because her fears had vanished, but because she had chosen not to let them control her. When Mama Esther came again the next week, Helen welcomed her without hesitation. The road ahead was still long, but every shared meal, every honest conversation, was another stone laid on the bridge from fear to forgiveness. That night, after John had fallen asleep, Helen knelt by the bed. She whispered a prayer not just for herself, but for the generations before her and those yet to come. Lord, thank you for showing me that my story can be different. Thank you for Mama's courage to speak, for John's patience, and even for Mama Esther's return. Help me never to pass my fears to my children. Help me to be a wife who speaks, a mother who protects, and a daughter-in-law who forgives. Let the chain end here. As she rose, she felt peace wash over her, like cool water on a parched throat. For the first time, she no longer saw herself as a victim of her past, but as the author of her future. In the weeks that followed, Helen grew stronger. She no longer flinched at the thought of her mother-in-law. Instead, she embraced each encounter as a chance to write a new story. She no longer saw John as her father's shadow, but as the man who had promised to stand beside her and had proven it. Most importantly, she no longer saw herself as a prisoner of her childhood. She was free, and with that freedom came a new determination. To raise her children in a home where silence was never mistaken for peace, where voices defended love, and where forgiveness paved the way for healing. The cycle had been broken. The morning sun painted the village in golden hues, spilling its light over the clay houses and the narrow footpaths winding between them. Helen stood at the doorway of her home, watching the children run in the yard. Their laughter was pure, unburdened by fear or suspicion. For a long moment, she let the sound wash over her like music. This was what she had always wanted, a home that breathed peace, not silence. A place where her children would grow knowing protection, not neglect. And though the journey had been painful, she finally believed it was possible. Over the weeks that followed, Helen noticed subtle changes in her household. The air was lighter, conversations were freer. John, once cautious and quiet, now spoke openly about his hopes and fears. Helen, no longer weighed down by mistrust, found herself laughing more easily, smiling without forcing it. The children, too, sensed the shift. They no longer tiptoed around their mother's moods or shrank at the mention of their grandmother. Instead, they greeted Mama Esther with shy affection whenever she visited. It wasn't perfect. At times, Helen still felt old fears clawing at her heart. But she no longer gave them control. She acknowledged them, breathed through them, and chose a different response. One late afternoon, Mama Esther arrived with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She placed it carefully in Helen's hands. "It's nothing much," Mama Esther said, her voice shaky. "Just groundnuts from the farm. I wanted to bring something for the children." Helen stared at the bundle, her chest tightening. Years ago, such a gesture would have felt like mockery. But now she saw it differently, not as an attempt to buy affection, but as a small act of humility. "Thank you, Mama," Helen said softly. She looked into the older woman's eyes and saw no trace of the arrogance she once feared. Instead, she saw a mother trying, in her own fragile way, to mend broken ground. John, standing beside them, smiled with quiet pride. This was what he had prayed for, a wife who could welcome his mother without suspicion, and a mother who could meet his wife without malice. The annual New Yam Festival arrived, drawing families together in celebration. For Helen, the festival had always been bittersweet, full of color and music on the outside, but laced with anxiety within. She had dreaded attending with her mother-in-law, imagining whispers and comparisons, watching for disapproval in every glance. But this year was different. As they walked to the village square, John held one child's hand while Helen held the other. Behind them, Mama Esther walked with a careful but steady step. Some villagers raised their eyebrows, surprised to see them together. Others nodded with approval, recognizing the courage it took to appear united. When the drums began and dancers filled the square, Helen felt something shift inside her. She was no longer the frightened child hiding behind her mother. She was a woman who had faced her shadows and chosen light. When Mama Esther leaned over during the feast to say, "The yam is sweet today, eh?" Helen smiled genuinely and replied, "Yes, Mama. It is." Simple words. But for Helen, they were proof that new beginnings were real. A week later, Helen visited her mother, Mama Grace, with the children. The old woman's eyes filled with tears as she saw her daughter walk in, confident and calm. "You look lighter, my child," Mama Grace said, holding Helen's hands. "I can see it in your eyes." Helen nodded, her throat tightening. I've made peace, Mama. With myself, with John, and with his mother. It wasn't easy, but I did it. Mama Grace sighed with relief, pressing her palm against her daughter's cheek. Then you have done what I could not. You have ended what began with me. Your children will never know the chains we carried. The words struck Helen like a blessing. She hugged her mother tightly, feeling years of unspoken sorrow dissolve between them. That evening, Helen gathered her children around the fire. They listened with wide eyes as she told them stories not just of folktales and heroes, but of her own life. I grew up afraid of my grandmother, she told them gently. She hurt me with words that left deep scars. And for a long time, I thought every grandmother was the same. But I was wrong. People can change. We can choose to forgive. Her eldest child frowned in confusion. But Mama, if she hurt you, why forgive her? Helen smiled softly. Because forgiveness is not for her alone. It is for me too. If I carry bitterness, it will grow heavy and crush me. But if I forgive, I become free. And when I am free, I can love better. That is how we build a new beginning. The children nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Helen knew they might not fully understand now, but one day, when life tested them, they would remember. Later that night, as the children slept, John sat beside Helen under the stars. He reached for her hand, his voice tender. Helen, you've given me a gift greater than I ever hoped for. You've given me peace between the two women I love most. You've given me a home that breathes joy again. Helen leaned against him, her heart swelling with quiet pride. And you, John, gave me the space to heal. You didn't push me when I wasn't ready. You stood by me when I faltered. That is why I could take this step. He kissed her forehead gently. Then we did this together. Yes, she whispered, together. Months passed, and the bond between Helen and Mama Esther deepened. There were still awkward moments. Of course, old habits didn't vanish overnight. But Helen no longer approached them with fear. Instead, she met them with patience, choosing understanding over suspicion. On one quiet afternoon, as they prepared cassava together, Mama Esther suddenly reached for Helen's hand. My daughter, she said softly, thank you for giving me another chance. You had every reason to shut me out, but you let me in. May God bless you for it. Helen's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed the older woman's hand and replied, and thank you, Mama, for coming back to us. For choosing humility. Together, we are rewriting this story. Years later, when Helen looked back on this season of her life, she would not remember only the pain. She would remember the turning point, the moment she chose not to be silent, the moment she chose forgiveness over fear. She would remember how her children grew up in a home filled with laughter instead of tension, how her husband stood firmly by her side, and how her mother-in-law transformed from a shadow of dread into a figure of reconciliation. And she would know that she had succeeded not just in surviving her past, but in breaking its hold. The cycle had ended with her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Helen stood outside with John, watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. Mama Esther sat on the veranda, humming softly as she peeled yams. The air was filled with warmth, laughter, and peace. Helen leaned into John's shoulder, whispering, "This is what I prayed for, a new beginning." John wrapped his arm around her and smiled. "And it's only the beginning, Helen. Only the beginning." The laughter of their children rose into the night, echoing the promise of a legacy rewritten, a family reborn, and a future unshackled from the past. Helen grew up haunted by the painful image of her grandmother mistreating her mother, while her father stood by in silence. Those childhood scars shaped her fears, making her believe every mother-in-law was cruel. When she came of age, Helen rejected four suitors simply because their mothers were alive. She eventually married John, believing his mother was gone after abandoning her children for another man. 15 years later, John's mother, Mama Esther, returned seeking forgiveness. While John longed for reconciliation, Helen was terrified, convinced that welcoming a mother-in-law would lead to suffering like her mother endured. Their marriage came under strain as Helen resisted, even threatening separation. Through months of struggle, community whispers, and heartfelt interventions, especially from her own mother, Mama Grace Helen began to confront her fears. Slowly, she realized she was projecting her mother's pain onto her own life. When Helen finally agreed to meet Mama Esther, she discovered humility, not malice. Forgiveness and open dialogue transformed their family. Helen not only healed her relationship with her husband, but also broke the generational cycle of bitterness. In the end, Helen embraced her mother-in-law, creating a home filled with peace, laughter, and the promise of a new beginning. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Tell us what you think about Helen's decision never to get married to a man whose mother is alive. If you enjoy our videos, please take a moment to follow and subscribe to our channel to stay updated on our upcoming stories. Thank you.